Day 2 of the trial of Richard Satchwell for the murder of his wife, Tina. Back in 2017, in their home in Youghal, her remains, of course, were found in the house, buried beneath the floorboards under the stairwell, 6 years after she went missing. But interestingly, and towards the end of your day today, Eamon, they started replaying some interviews that Satchwell did with the media for the jury because, of course, he's on trial now for her murder, but in the aftermath of her disappearance, he did engage quite a bit with the media.
Yeah, so they played 3 of them today, and one of them was quite lengthy. It was an interview he gave with PJ Coogan from Cork's 96 FM at the time. And now this is in the 9th of July, so it's a little bit on. At this stage, the house has already been searched, the first non-invasive search that we heard about yesterday. So there was some evidence of that earlier today. We'll get to that. And PJ Coogan was introduced this that it was pre-recorded from the previous day, from when it was actually aired, and he said because that was unusual for them, but Mr. Satchwell wasn't going to be available on the day that the radio station wanted to do it.
They recorded him in advance. Now that was July. Of course, he reported her missing. I think we talked about this yesterday, the 20th of March.
Well, he said he last saw her on the 20th of March, and his first interaction with the guards was the 24th of March, and then the formal statement of a missing person was then in May. It was, I think, the 11th or 12th of May.
Okay.
So this is kind of now, there's already been a little bit of publicity, and PJ Coogan, when he's introducing it, is saying that he wants to get this interview because he knows that Mr. Satchwell is getting fed up with some of the press coverage, and so he wanted to talk to him before he kind of wouldn't give any more interviews.
Shut down as such.
And he goes into it, it starts off, it's Mr. Satchwell telling the story again of how Tina had asked him to go to Aldi that day on the 20th and to pick up a few bits and pieces, and she was gone on his return. He after a while, when he realised she wasn't in the house, and then after a while when she wasn't coming back, he checked the house again, and that was around 5ish, he was saying. And when he went, he realised the suitcases and the money was gone. And in reply to PJ Coogan on this recorded interview that we're listening to in court, he's explaining that he was asked what was the money for, and he said that was to renovate the property. And he talks about then the trip to Fermoy to see his doctor, and when he went, her family members were there. He fully expected to see her there. And he just...
What was the trip to Fermoy?
He was going to his GP.
Okay.
That's where because they had lived in Fermoy for quite a long time, and the GP practice, I suppose, they were signed up to was still there. So he was going back to his GP, and while he was there, then he went to see Tina Satchwell's family members to see if she was staying there, and he was upset, and then kind of got worried, and that's when he went to the guards, and he was asked that in this radio, why did you wait for 4 days? And he said that, look, it's in my statement to the guards, but it's not something I want for public consumption. Now, we heard yesterday in the opening of the trial, there was stuff about where we're going to hear, and he stated that he was worried that Tina had kind of said that if he ever calls the guards, she would ring them and set them on him. Mm-hmm. And that she didn't like guards or didn't want to have any dealings with them. And he goes into this as well. And he was kind of...
On this interview with PJ?
Yeah, on this interview, not about her. He talks in this interview about how, she was unusual, and that, she kind of say, don't go near the guards unless it's life or death, and, try not to have any dealings with them. And he didn't really, pay much attention to it, or, this is something she had said over the years. And he was explaining, he'd been fully cooperative with the guards. He gave up her phone willingly. And he was asked, was it a happy marriage? And he said, well, we celebrated 25 years before Christmas, 25 years of being married. And he said, I've been to everyone I can think of. He's driven to Killarney to see Tina's relatives there, to see if they'd heard from her. And he was asked about the search of his home, and he says, I didn't get any warning. He said he got a phone call when he was in Limerick, working as a truck driver, and he was told he had a warrant. And he says in the interview, the lock bar was already out of the door. He says, I would have given him a key anyway. And asked, was he surprised? He said he was. And he said, look, I left him to the job because I've nothing to hide. And so this is him speaking now in July 2017.
And of course, the state case is that at this point, Tina Satchwell was buried. She had been murdered, they say, in the house. Satchwell had initially, the state say, put her body in a freezer in the back garden of the house in Youghal. And the state say he then wrapped her body in black plastic and buried her under the stairwell, basically under concrete. Was it under the
the cover of concrete? Yeah, that's the state's case. So this is but this search he's talking about here is the first search where the body isn't discovered. You know, they're not doing a full invasive search.
And you heard other evidence around this search at the time earlier in the day in court. We'll get to that, but of course to point out that the state say that during that search her remains were already under the stairwell in that home that was searched. But we'll come back to that. So the interview with PJ Coogan is obviously, is it friendly? Is it a little bit fraught? Or
I suppose you could say Satchwell he's been careful, and I mean, even at the time, if you took it at face value, you can possibly understand why, because he feels, and he says this in the interview, that the press have misput, as he put it, and put words together that weren't necessarily true. And at one point in the interview, he shows a phone message that he got from a relative of Tina's saying, "Stop doing the stories; it's not helping." And PJ Coogan, explains for the radio listeners, he's handing me his phone, and I'm reading this message now. And he was asked then, well, what did they take from the house? And like in terms of, I was told, he said that they'd taken technology and documents, and asked, well, what documents did he take? He said, I don't know, they haven't told me. So, he talks about, like, one of the stories he was upset about was that, the Coast Guard had found clothing, and he was going to be asked to ID it along with two other relatives. And he said it ended up being in the press, and he was critical of that. He was moaning about it, was the best way to put it, like in this interview, And he said none of it was belonging to Tina. And he was asked then about his feelings, how this made him feel, and all the ups and downs of it. And, he was constantly, he would talk about, the pressure on him, he said, I came close to doing something. He doesn't say what. So he says he went out and got a driving job again. And he said it was the first time in 28 years that I'd had a driving job without her as navigator. And he described going past places where they would have stopped for picnics and hotels they would have stayed. Asked about, the drinking habits. He said she'd have an occasional red wine, maybe a champagne on a special occasion, and that he hadn't had a drink in 30 years. And he describes one day how he illegally stopped the truck and ran out and gave a young woman a fright when he thought he'd seen Tina. She said, he just said, her figure, the way she moved and the clothes she was wearing, he was convinced it was her. And he said, when he's asked, he says his dream would be that she'll turn up as suddenly as she left, she'd just turn up. And, he talked about how they used to talk for hours, and that, I miss her laughing, I miss her smiles, there's no joy left. And he said, I would say to Tina, you're not in trouble with the Gardaí. If you still want time away, just send a letter to anyone, to a radio station, to the guards, to a member of the family. Just just put it out there that you're okay. And he was then asked, why would she be worried about Gardaí? And this is where he talks about, Tina has always said to me, never go to the guards unless it's life or death. And
so Satchwell's sitting in court listening to this interview he's given many years previous, the local radio station.
He sat there, his head down. Now, he does have a writing pad with him, so I couldn't see if he was taking notes or anything, but his head was down while these were being played. And in the interview with PJ Coogan, on 96 FM, then, he says, walking into a Garda barracks would be the last thing Tina would do. And he did mention that, he had been in trouble with the guards once before, but that was before they had met. So, he wasn't really sure why Tina would necessarily have any kind of reason to avoid the guards. But, but the reason the interview went down this road about, was because he had said, as a part of his message to Tina, you've nothing to worry, you're not in trouble with the guards. So, and this is his kind of explanation of why he was saying that. Now, he talked about how they first met in England. She was 18 when he first saw her, he wanted to marry her, and she wasn't love at first sight for her. That she liked the better looking guys. He said he was overweight at the time, and but he ended up, as he says, she fell in love with my personality, and then they did the whole thing of moving back and forth to England and Ireland. They got married in Oldham when she was 20, and said then he gets on very well with the relatives when he was asked about this. And PJ Coogan said, "Oh, it's kind of strange you don't have their phone numbers." I came up, why they weren't able to contact people easily, that they drive and see them.
Right.
And he says, and they don't have ours either. He says, by way of exclamation, well, they don't have, I don't have theirs and they don't have ours. And he said they weren't kind of separated or estranged. He said, he said, we lived around the corner from them in Fermoy for years and years. And there was a couple of other kind of bits and pieces in that interview. Again, like, even though he said like they weren't separated, he was asked about, why, had she drifted away from the family, and he continued to say that wasn't really the truth, that they hadn't drifted away from.
Had that been reported in the media at the time, or something that he was being asked that?
Well, this is what he was saying. He was kind of suggesting that
these sort of falsehoods had been reported in the media.
And he said, like, he was asked, like, like what, he was talking about how often they used to speak on the phone together and were regularly chatting. And now he says, he was asked, like, how's he, it kind of came up then. He says, my phone doesn't stop ringing now, but it's usually someone from a newspaper looking for information. And he complained about the press. He said that, people were taking bits and pieces out of other interviews he'd done, and that he said he'd only spoken to 4 journalists at this stage, and that, other journalists were making stories out of what he'd said in those interviews. Now, there was none of, this is just what he was saying in the interview on 98 FM. And he actually said, like, he was actually physically ill and stressed out. And a lot of that, or some of that, was the constant pressure from the press. And
now, this was one of 3 interviews that was played today to the jury, and you were told, was it, there was 14 pieces of media that the rest will be played tomorrow. The PJ Coogan interview was obviously the lengthiest. Yeah,
that was the third one. So there was one from the Irish Independent as well, independent.ie. And it was a reasonably short one. It was a recap of the story. And he mentioned, in one part of it, he mentions as well that, he'd been told by family members that, questions had been asked about him that he thought were unfair questions. This is the kind of, like, I think the Gardaí, he'd been told that Gardaí had asked family members, like, was he ever violent towards Tina? So he was, he was upset about that.
Responding to that on these clips of media that have been played to the jury.
Yeah. And it opened up with this opened up with the I think the first media interview he gave, which was on the 26th of June in 2017, and that was with RTE's Pascal Sheehy, and again that was played full volume. Again, he talks about her. She loves life in general, and how they met in the UK, and he was appealing for her to try and get in touch. And
is he appealing directly to her in that?
Well, he's been asked, like, what would you say to Tina? And he was saying, like, please come home. Again, he goes through the last time he saw her, the story about going to Aldi, coming back, finding the keys on the floor, her phone on the kitchen top. Normally she'd be in the sitting room watching MTV or a music program. The dog being there, which was unusual. And then a few hours later, when she didn't come back, he checked the sunbed. She wasn't in that. He tells the story of going to the doctor in Fermoy and meeting family members. And he said that's when the worry really set in, and he went to the guards. And that's the first kind of interaction he has with the guards. And this is the first time the guards, get any kind of report that Tina Satchwell has gone missing or she's not at home. And he said, look, he says in this interview to Pascal Sheehy that, I went away a couple of years ago myself to get my head straight. And he said, but it's not like her. And he tells a story about how, she put her wedding ring on her grandmother who's being buried because the grandmother didn't have a wedding ring while she was being buried. And that, this is an example of her generosity. And he talks about, he's been getting down a lot, or she was getting down a lot before she went missing, and she'd be crying in my arms. And he says in this interview in RTE, I felt I let her down. I should have just taken her to the doctor. And asked about what you think happened. He just said, I just think she went away to get her head straight. And And again, asked when, what will you say to Tina if she's listening? And he said, look, no one's mad at you. My arms are open. I need you back. And the pets are missing you like crazy. And he urges her to come home and see the new parrot that they had bought and how that is now flourishing in the house. This is the parrot called Valentine that he mentioned in the interview.
Now, interestingly, back to the beginning of the day where you had a series of Garda who were involved in sort of, I suppose, taking the initial... We've heard some reports about his initial missing persons report, or he certainly shows concern, first of all. But by sort of the June, concern is ramping up and the Gardaí go in, get a warrant and go in and search that property. He's away working as a truck driver at the time. But we heard details about this search. Yeah.
So, I mean, yesterday we'd have heard the Garda witnesses, the person in Fermoy who took the initial report from him, and then the follow-up Garda in Youghal. And so today on the stand was Sergeant John Sharkey, who's now retired, and he was the station sergeant at the time. So when this was all happening. So he'd been involved in all the kind of, I suppose, the investigation meetings. And, he talked about how as time passed, concern grew for her welfare, how one of the Garda witness had, from yesterday, had called to his home and spoke to him and interviewed him and, on the status of any contact with her, and there appeared to be none. And then he formally made the missing persons report on the 11th of May. This is Mr. Satchwell. And then he said, the Garda witness said, well, once the report was made, it upgraded the investigation from basically a casual inquiry to a formal report. And they carried out all the various inquiries, the trawl of CCTV, social media campaign, TV and radio news, house-to-house searches, and all the various witnesses. And the outcome was basically, it didn't lead us to Mrs. Satchwell or further the investigation. It was fruitless, I suppose, is how we put it. So coming into late May and June, according to the former sergeant, he said they haven't reviewed the evidence. They concluded something criminal may have occurred, and they applied to Judge Terence Finn at Youghal District Court and applied for a search warrant for number 3 Grattan Street, and that was granted. And then on the 7th of June, so at 7 a.m, they called to the house. They were accompanied by a number of Gardaí. He had a mobile for Richard Satchwell, and he called him and told him he was told that he wasn't nearby. He thinks he was up the country somewhere. And they utilised the services of a locksmith and got access without causing any damage, and the formal search was carried out. Now, this Garda witness wasn't involved in the search, and he was aware of items being seized and exhibits officers, and he just let them do their job. And he said, they had a new key for the house, and they rang him and told him, look, it'll be at the station. You can come and collect it when you get back to Youghal.
So again, this is the jury are listening to the details of this search, which happens on the 8th of June. And that's more than 2 months after she goes missing. But it is the state's case, and it has been stated in the opening of this trial that at this point, the state believed that Satchwell had killed his wife, Tina, had hid her body in a freezer at the back of the house for a couple of days before he'd buried her under the stairwell. So in other words, the jury are hearing this evidence about this search, but they have been told the state's case is that she at this point is lying, her remains are lying under the staircase.
Yeah. So at this stage, the Gardaí are kind of looking at escalating the inquiry. And under cross-examination, the retired sergeant, says, look, there was suspicion, and it was a kind of a corporate decision. As it was put to him, was this a corporate decision or yours alone? He says, no, there was meetings with, other members, including, senior officers, reviewing all the material that they had, or all the what they knew at this stage from their initial inquiries, and this is what led to looking for the search warrant. And so more or less it went from being at a low level of attention and complaints, as it's called, I think it was, up to missing persons. So that allowed them to, I suppose, bring in more resources to it. And this included like a trawl of CCTV, which this witness was involved with as well. He went to the credit union, the post office. There was a private company as well, which apparently their cameras weren't actually recording. And they would have they would have taken the parts, to try and corroborate Mr. Satchwell's version of events. So this is why they were looking for the CCTV at that stage.
So what, evidence did you have of that search? Who was there? Was there forensic scientists, or was it just Gardaí, and what level of a search was it?
No, we learned from various witnesses that there was something like 10 guards that were attached to a divisional search squad. Now, again, you couldn't remember the exact numbers, but there was also then, you would have had the forensic scientist that was brought in from Forensic Science Ireland later in the day. And then there would have been the Gardaí at the scene who record who comes in and out of the crime scene, and there was other crime scene investigators. So there was around 16, 17, 18 or less. I think the figure that was put forward by Brendan Grehan, the counsel for Satchwell, was about 16, and the witness kind of more or less agreed with that. And he said, look, the Gardaí went in, with an open mind. It was a thorough search. He talked about He talked about the various people that I mentioned, including there was a photographer, and he was next up.
Okay.
So you had Cathal Whelan as a crime scenes investigator based in Cove, and he was actually first in. So he did all the photographs of the house. He went through the rooms. It was described as being a three-story semi-D. It was a tall, narrow building, and the attic was converted to a well. So effectively, it was a 4-story house. He described it as being an old house, probably over 100 years old. The front door opens to the street, and there's a small backyard at the back. And he described it now as untidy, unkempt. He said there was dog feces on the floor. He said there was a dirty bird cage with a parrot in it, and dishes which looked like hadn't been washed in a long time in one part of the house as well. He's describing there was outside at the back, there was an outside toilet, and there was a shed with a washing machine. There was a wheelie bin with stones beside it. He said there was a staircase that appeared to be, a banister of new and untreated wood, and beside the wall was a relatively new plasterboard. And, there was DIY material in the front bedroom on the first floor, and then similar stairs, up to the second floor, which was overflowing with racks of clothing and unopened packages of clothing as well. And there was an album of 12 photographs that this Garda Whelan had taken, and these were, as they were gone through, he was asked to describe these. The jury had these in their hand as well, so they were able to see them. And then there was a little bit of cross-examination on that, and it was just, I think there was 2 other photographs that the defence wanted to have a look at as well. And it was just to confirm that he had taken them, and that this photograph was the middle room, as it was called, in I think on the bottom floor, on the ground floor. And then I suppose we get to what I suppose people like to know is the CSI part of the trial. This is one of the forensic scientists from Forensic Science Ireland. He'd been contacted by Gardaí, Dr. Edward Conley, and was contacted by the Gardaí, and he was asked to take part in the search in the house. And his purpose was to look for any traces of blood. And I think it had been referred to one of the previous witnesses as a kind of a luminol test or whatever. And he referred to a different chemical called Blue Star. He said it's a water-based chemical, can be sprayed and it illuminates blood. And he says we use it as an aid in a blood search. And he went through the entire house. He was asked, what room did you look at? And he said all of it. And they found nothing. So it took. He obviously had to wait till the evening,
right?
Because you want to be able to see if stuff is glowing in the dark. And he was asked, well, what were you, what kind of brief were you given? Were you told where to look or anything like this? And he was just told, look, it was a missing persons case, and to check the house for the presence of blood in any unusual circumstances, and nothing was found. And then there was more then, in terms of the layout of the house. There was a technician who was a mapping expert, so he produced a map of the house that is now being used in so
the house
Book
is
of
kind
Evidence.
of narrow and long. As such, narrow and tall, really.
Yeah, it's an old kind of terrace house, and there was some bits and pieces about kind of its dimensions. And one room was 10 foot by 9 foot, and that the front and back walls are quite thick; they're nearly 2 foot thick. So it is an old house, as one of the witnesses said. It's more than 100 years old. It's Grattan Street, number 3 Grattan Street in Youghal.
And as regards the bedrooms full of the clothes and the unopened clothes, did hear yesterday during the opening that the couple went along to these car boot sales, and I think he at some point tells the Gardaí that they sell stuff at these regularly, their regular attendance at them, and that she's buying as well as he's selling. She's buying more stuff.
Yeah, and she's a lover of fashion. And we heard then yesterday as well. He said in one statement to the guards that he couldn't tell them what clothes she was wearing because he had no idea what she'd taken with her because she had so many clothes. So we're hearing about this. Then it was described as basically being the entire second floor was described as being a walk-in wardrobe. And
the parrot came up in the opening day of the court case as well. You had the name there a minute ago. But what was the significance of the parrot?
Well, it was one that they had bought. He mentioned it in the RTE interview with Pascal Sheehy, saying, one of the reasons why she should come home is because the pets were going crazy, and the parrot they'd recently bought and called Valentine's was really thriving and doing great, and she'd get great pleasure, I guess, about coming home to see. Yeah.
So this search happens and Gardaí go away with some technical devices, as he later says to the media, and other items which are yet to be identified in the court case.
It was, well, what we know was taken were two laptops. One of them was a Toshiba laptop, and again, there was an officer gave evidence of seizing these and being at the scene. So this is the very thorough kind of going through all the evidence. But then we know there was a then Detective Sergeant, now an Inspector, Daniel Holland. The day after the search, he spoke with Richard Satchwell, and it was the first opportunity they had. It wasn't a formal interview or anything like that, and he was told about this, when he came to Middleton Garda Station, and he sat in with another colleague, and they had a long chat about the relationship again, we had with Tina Satchwell, and they asked him about some of the items that were seized, and some of these were actually documents relating to money transfers, Western Union money transfers. So he was asked about these, and he said that this was to do with a plan that him and Tina had, that they wanted to either buy or adopt some marmoset monkeys. And he said it was explained in this section of evidence that the Garda had said that these Western Union transfers were actually in the thousands and into lots of different places around the world. So he was asking, this was the explanation he got. He didn't suggest that there was anything untoward or anything like that, but he was asking him to explain why this money was and the reason.
After they discovered these documents which showed these transfers.
Yeah, and he said, look, it was their wish that they wanted to get some marmoset monkeys.
What are marmoset monkeys?
They're small little monkeys, like with kind of
little
hairy bits sticking out the side of their face. They're small,
1970s sort of whiskers.
I did a quick Google. Something like that. You'd reckon if you saw one, you say, "Oh yeah, I know them."
Okay.
Anyway.
And can you can you have a monkey in Ireland?
I know from a recent story that we did about somebody having a zebra at a St. Patrick's Day parade that the trade in wild animals is illegal under the CITES convention worldwide. But there can be exceptions for captive-born animals. But I do think it would be difficult to import monkeys. But that's beside the point. That's nothing to do with this case.
No, it's this sort of a lot of reference to animals. But I suppose that's their lifestyle, isn't it, that we're hearing about?
Yeah.
That they have
the two dogs and the parrot.
And the house, of course, we heard as well in the opening that they had sold a house in Fermoy and bought this house in Youghal, and they had a kind of a bit of a slush fund left over, which he said was more than 25 grand, which he said that Tina Satchwell made way with when she left him.
Yeah, and then in this kind of chat that he had then with the Detective Holland, he gave the explanation that the money was actually savings from the car boot sales, and that they'd often make 200 to 250 a week. And that this money was going to go towards the renovation at number 3 Grattan Street, and that this particular money was going to be for a central heating system. But he also said, look, he couldn't really explain why he had wired so much money for these monkeys. And he said, look, it's all in the emails on the laptop. So, and this is in the report that the guard made after the conversation, because it was a conversation, not an interview. It wasn't recorded.
And talking about their relationship at this point, where this is June, the search is June 8th, this is June 9th. She's missing, more than 2 months. Missing since he reported her missing on the 24th of March, saying he last saw her on the 20th of March. What does he say is the state of the relationship at that point to the Gardaí?
Well, we know from the report that Sergeant Holland wrote up that Richard Satchwell used the word obsessed. He was obsessed with her, and the sergeant said that was a strong word and it stuck with him, and that's why he used that word in his report. Like it wasn't the Garda's word that he when he was writing up the report. This came out under the cross-examination by Brendan Grehan. And again, like it goes through, it repeats some of the kind of what we heard yesterday, that in this report, like a good bit of it was read out in court today. And Satchwell, is said to have talked about how he'd sacrificed a lot for the marriage. He cut off ties with his own family. He wanted children and she didn't. And in this report, Satchwell is describing her as headstrong and forward where she wasn't, and said that her mood had deteriorated in recent times, and that there was examples of extreme anger on her part, and that he was knocked out on 2 occasions. That he didn't specify, like in this chat with the guards, but when this happened, and that the last one had been just a week before she went missing. But he said when she wasn't in this mood, she was just the perfect person. And Satchwell at this time is saying to the guards, look, he had said to her that she needed to get help with her mental health, but she wouldn't take up any kind of idea of this. She wouldn't, seek any kind of help from medics for this. And he mentions again that she was brought up in a dysfunctional childhood, but doesn't get into any specifics about, about what. And the Garda actually describes, saying that, look, he was very easy to talk to, and he was sometimes get distracted and go off on tangents, but otherwise was, seemed quite cooperative.
So I wanted to ask you what, again, yesterday the court was pretty packed. It was a pretty packed courtroom, 6, I think you said you were in. Who's there? Is there family members there, would you think? I
can't say for sure there's family members there. I mean, it's attracting, as because of the nature of the case. There is, the members of the public who like to come and see justice in action, or see a court case in action. So there's a group of people there. There's a lot of guards there. They're presumably they're going to be witnesses. There's quite a few of our media colleagues. There's more than you'd usually expect. Plus some of our colleagues who are normally based in Cork are up for it as well. So there's so it's kind of it's
busy enough.
Yeah.
So you spoke yesterday saying that there was going to be more than 100 witnesses. Are they on a trajectory? Are they going to, do you think, present this case chronologically and bring the witnesses as the time and the events that they're going to present to the jury go through? Sometimes court cases aren't presented chronologically.
No, this seems to be done in so kind far. Of a logical timeline from our point of view, and we've gotten as far as July 2017.
Yes.
And I suppose it starts on the 24th of March that year when he walks into Fermoy Garda Station. So we're now, what is that, 4 months into the case. Now we know from the opening statements that there is going to be a jump, that that the case was escalated, the investigation was escalated again in 2013. So
in 2023.
In 2023 it was the case was escalated again. Yeah. So we know there's obviously going to be a gap in I suppose evidence to some extent, that it'll probably proceed reasonably quick. It's something that was obviously on
that's what they talked about, a more thorough search, which ultimately resulted in the remains of Tina Satchwell being found in the property.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's which has brought him to where he is today, charged with murdering Tina Satchwell at the address.
And how is he in court? Is he attentively listening? Is he distracted?
No, I mean, he sits pretty still in court. He has his notebook in hand. Like, he's in he's wearing a different t-shirt and shirt today.
So he's attentive and he's listening. There has been no indication from the beginning, you've been told there'll be 100 witnesses, but you don't know obviously who all of those are. We know the events that are going to be relayed to the jury, and we know that in scenes of crime there are rather a lot of Gardaí called in trials, sometimes even the ones that, are manning the crime scene overnight, and they'll have to come and give evidence. So that can take up a lot of those witnesses. But at no point in the opening statement that was presented by the state to the jury was there a suggestion that family or friends of the couple were involved at any point in what is going to be, presented in the trial.
No, there's nothing that we've heard yesterday or today. Really, we do know that, there'll be a pathologist it will be giving evidence, or certainly a witness. Whether sometimes this can all change. The two sides in a trial can agree that we'll accept the state's version of events on that one. There's nothing in it for them.
But I suppose the state's case is the events that occurred happened within that home where they lived together, just the two of them, and where they obviously, so far the evidence given is that they lived a fairly, they were just together a lot. They were out at these car boot sales. They were in the house together. They had the animals together, and that's where everything really, that house is central to this trial, isn't it? Everything.
Yeah, it's really all centred around number 3 Grattan Street. Yeah.
Right. So back tomorrow for day 3.
Yes, and we'll see some more media clips of interviews then.
Absolutely. Thanks, Eamon.
Always a pleasure, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.